Good morning everyone, Country Flyboy here, and today, basics tutorials. Alright, so there's a lot of new flight simmers out there now that FSX has been released on Steam, and I think we need to go over the basics. Now, I encourage everyone to watch these videos. It's going to be a series of tutorials, again, but I do encourage everyone to watch it because even if you're an experienced flight simmer, there may be something you don't know. I know quite a bit about the simulator inside and out, and I've actually educated some people who have been around for a while on what different things the sim can do. So we're here at Alma Bacon County Airfield in Alma, Georgia, and we're going to go over some basics of flying the aircraft in Flight Simulator. We're going to go with the default Cessna 172, and I'm going to be sticking to default aircraft or freeware add-ons that I know work with FSX Steam Edition, because that's where most of the new guys are. I don't want to say noob, that sounds kind of bad, but so let's get started. So I guess we should go through the tutorial in the order that you would encounter this stuff in the simulator. So let's assume the noobs have gotten... I'm going to call you noobs. I don't mean it as an insult, but it's going to happen. Let's assume they've gotten this far with the default flight saved, the airplane is on the ramp, and the engine is not running. So we got to get this engine running. Now, I should warn you that the default aircraft in Flight Simulator are not 100% realistic, especially when it comes to ground operations. They're a bit better in the air, but ground operations, yeah, they kind of suffer in terms of realism. So, we aren't going to be able to start this airplane 100% realistic, but we can follow the same flow. Now, I will be referring to some of these switches. Be familiar with the keyboard commands as well. In particular, the F5 through F8 keys are what lower your flaps. If I zoom over to the flap indicator real quick, or the flap lever, I should say. So here we see the flap lever. This aircraft has 3 flap positions, well, technically 4. Up, 10 degrees, 20 degrees, and 35 degrees. Now, you're not going to... As long as the battery is off, the flaps will not work. So, the battery's off right now. But, I want to refer to these F5 through F8 keys. I'm doing this assuming you have a joystick of some kind. I'm not too familiar with the Xbox 360 controller button layout, but I do recommend a joystick. You'll have a much more fun with it. You can get an old cheap El Cheapo joystick anywhere. Alright, so F7 will lower the flaps 1 notch, and F6 will raise the flaps 1 notch. F8 lowers them to full, and F5 raises them up completely. Push and hold spacebar to get mouse view, where you can look around with a mouse. In an aircraft that had retractable landing gear, G would raise or lower the landing gear. This one doesn't have that. Now, you could auto start the engine with Control E if you want. F1 through F4 is your throttle. If you look at the throttle here, F1 kills the throttle. It brings it out completely. F4 is full throttle. F2, push and hold, will bring the throttle out slowly. And F3 will increase it slowly. Alright, so that is the button prompts that we need to be familiar with before we get to starting the engine. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get the engine started. The first thing we need to do is master battery on. Flip both of these red switches on, master battery and alternator. Next thing we need to do is lights. The beacon light should be on. Then we need to push the mixture in full rich. Make sure the fuel shutoff valve is pushed full in. That's cut off, that's full in on.
Never let it be said that the default aircraft are realistic by any stretch of the mind, because I actually got something wrong there. In the real aircraft, yes, that knob needs to be pushed in. That is the fuel shut-off valve that is used in emergencies if you need to cut the fuel supply to the engine. However, it's backwards. It needs to be pulled out in order to function. In the default FSX Cessna 172, it needs to be pulled out and that is apparently on for that. And I've also noticed that between the 2D cockpit and the 3D cockpit, the two will not agree. So in the 2D cockpit, it's on by pushed full in, but in the 3D cockpit, it's pulled out and for it to be on. So it's backwards. So just make sure that that is pulled out in the virtual cockpit and pushed in the 2D cockpit. And that will supply fuel in the engine. So, yeah, never let it be said default airplanes are accurate.
And the tank selector is on both tanks. So now the aircraft is ready to start. We're going to move the magnetos over to both. Make sure the engine propeller area is clear. Nothing is around us. And we're just going to bring the key one more time to the start position. And I have apparently forgotten something. Throttle. Is that? Okay, we've learned something. Apparently the shutoff valve is backwards on this airplane. If you look on the panel, it's pushed on there, but cut off there. Alright, well, whatever. There we go. Look to make sure your engine gauges over here come to life. Oil pressure is up. No enunciations. The engine is started. And we can turn the avionics on by hitting that white switch there. And the aircraft is now started up. Now for this first tutorial, I'm just going to go over the basics of flying the aircraft, although I will be using default ATC to communicate with the other airplanes. This is a non-towered airfield, so we won't be communicating with controllers. We just we need to use the radio so we know where all the other airplanes are. Watch this bearing. Where is he going? He's probably going over there on the other side of that Mooney.
November 176 Charlie Mike is taxiing to runway 15.
To taxi, you just give it a little bit of gas, not much. And then once you get going, you bring it back to idle. Now you can steer on the ground with whatever your rudder command is. So I don't know what the rudder keys are on the keyboard, but whatever you're using for rudder is how you steer on the ground, because you steer on the ground with the rudder pedals down there. So if you have a joystick with a Z axis that you can twist, that's usually the rudder command. Now you don't want to go very fast across the ground. You want to be keeping it nice and slow. Now, in real life, this is the point where we would do what's called an engine run-up, where we check to make sure the engine is performing good enough to fly safely. So I'm going to position us on the taxiway so that we can do an engine run-up. Alright, now we are ready to take off. We're just gonna depart. Let's do a flight real quick. This is the GPS. I have BQK. This is the GPS, one of the ways you can navigate in Flight Simulator. Don't worry about it right now. We'll talk more about GPS navigation in the future, but today we're going to be navigating the much more simpler way. So I'm going to taxi onto the runway. We want to make sure landing and strobe lights are on. Landing strobe. Now, according to the college textbooks, there's a lot of physics involved with making an airplane fly. But in practice, it's ridiculously simple. All you gotta do is get going fast enough. The faster the plane moves, the more air goes over the wings, the more lift you have. We get to a certain point, 55 knots indicated airspeed in this aircraft, and that's fast enough that we should be able to fly. So to take off, all we have to do in this airplane is advance the throttle to full, use the rudder to keep ourselves on the center line of the runway, and let the plane accelerate. There's 55 knots. I'll pull back on the stick a bit, and it's airborne. Now we want to establish ourselves in a climb attitude. Basically, we want the nose about 10 to 20 degrees above the horizon, and we want the altitude indicator to be increasing, and the VSI should show a climb. We want to keep our airspeed constant by using the pitch. So as you pitch up and pitch down, you will also slow the plane down or speed it up. Basically, if you descend, it will speed up. If you climb, it will slow down. So when you're running your throttle at full, you need to use pitch to control airspeed. Alright, now we're 500 feet above the field. I'm going to make a turn to the east, and we're going to get to heading to the airport that I put in the GPS, which was Brunswick Golden Isles Airport. Come on, frame rate, stay with me. Alright, and we'll go to an external view here and get a nice lovely look at Bacon County, Alma, the city of Alma in Bacon County, Georgia. Alrighty, so I'm going to pitch down to slow our climb a bit, but I'm going to speed the aircraft up to about 80 knots, which is a good climb speed in this airplane. And we're going to climb up to 3,500 feet. Alright, so let's talk some very, very basic stuff with Flight Simulator. To turn the airplane, you need to bank to the left or right. Now what this does is, if you look at the wings provide lift, and when you're straight and level, they provide lift straight up, which is what lets you fly. But if you bank the aircraft, you're turning some of that lift sideways, and less of that lift is vertical. Now take a mental note of that, because it's going to play into part in a second. So I'm going to get heading east real quick. And we're going to do a 90-degree turn to the right to fly south. So to turn the airplane, we first need to put the bank in. So remember, as we put bank in, less of the lift is going to be vertical and the nose is going to drop. If we want to keep, like if we were flying straight and level, we need to pull back on the stick some to keep the nose from dropping too much, and that will let us maintain altitude or climb. Now, did anyone notice anything particular about the turn? So I want you to pay attention to the stick as I do this next turn back to the east. I say stick, the yoke. So, watch what happens now. I'm going to turn back to the left. Now I'm going to establish the bank angle that I want. Let's say about a 20-degree bank. And then I'm going to let the bank out. So now I brought the yoke back to the middle. The plane will stay in a bank. And to let that bank out as we come to the heading, I bank the other direction. And voila. So basically, to do a turn, you put your bank in, make sure you use pitch to keep the plane from descending. You may have to increase power too if you're straight and level flight. And then to let the bank out, you turn in the opposite direction. Now, climb and descent is even easier. You just got to pitch the plane up and apply full power in this aircraft. Or to descend, you bring some power out and pitch the nose down. Alright, let's get it up to 3,500. Alright, the next thing you need to know about flight simming is navigation. Now, we're not going to worry about the more advanced navigation like RNAV or VORs or stuff right now. We'll touch on VORs later, but for the most part, we're going to just talk about what's called pilotage and dead reckoning. I'm going to mostly focus on pilotage, though. Pilotage is nothing more than looking out the window to navigate. And that is the best form of navigation. VORs and GPSs are nice, but really the best form to flying an airplane is just looking out the damn window and knowing where you're going. Now, I chose Brunswick Golden Isles Airport for a reason. It's not too terribly far away from Alma, and all we really have to do is fly east or slightly southeast to get to it. So what I recommend doing when you set the default flight up, like we talked about earlier, is pick an area of the world that you're familiar with, like your hometown or wherever you're currently living. That way you can identify landmarks on the ground. Default Flight Simulator, unless you're living in a big city, you might have a harder time finding some landmarks. Like out here in Alma, it's going to be next to impossible. But if you know different highways and stuff, you should be able to find it. Now real quick, I'm going to put a picture overlaid in the top left here. That is a screenshot from the program Plan G, which is a freeware program that I use quite a bit for flying. Now Plan G's unique feature is it lets me see where different things are, not just the navigation waypoints like VORs or stuff like that, but it lets me see roads and whatnot. So we can see that our flight plan from Alma to Brunswick, we could follow Georgia State Road 32 and will take us straight to Brunswick. So that's what we need to find. So real quick, I'm going to overlay our position on Plan G there with another screenshot. There you see. So that's where Plan G shows us. We're right on the flight path, and we should be relatively over Georgia State Road 32. Now, that's probably State Road 32 right there, because we can see it extends from Alma, bends to the south, and then back east a bit. So that's definitely State Road 32 right there. So all we gotta do is follow State Road 32, and that will take us to Brunswick. And that is the basics of navigating. That is it. Find something on the ground, preferably a highway, and follow it. Now, not all highways in the world are represented in Flight Simulator by default. I am using vector land class data from Flight 1 called Ultimate Terrain X, which is a payware add-on. So, but for the most part, major roads are represented in Flight Simulator. Another thing I should point out is Flight Sim does paint the roads pretty bright so they're easier to find. As you can see, Ultimate Terrain has camouflaged that road a bit, so it's a bit more realistic. Following a road like this in real life is a lot harder because it ain't but a 2-lane highway. That's it. And those are hard to see from the air, especially out in fucking nowhere like this is. And Georgia is nothing but rural. It's all wilderness until you get to the big cities. But that is the basics of navigating. Now you see power lines are very well represented down there because they have a 100-foot clearing either side the darn antennas or the wires. So power lines are excellent things to follow. Freeways are even better because you can clearly see freeways. Even in real life, freeways are easily spotted. You can also follow towns. As you can see, we are coming up to a town right now. So yeah, as you can see, we're coming up to a small town now. A quick look at Plan G. We can see that is Patterson, Georgia, which is roughly halfway between Alma and Brunswick. It's actually closer to Alma than it is to Brunswick, so just on the other side of Patterson, we can say is our halfway point. Now we can also see that the highway we're following goes into Patterson, and as Plan G indicates, State Road 32 goes through Patterson. So we know we're following the right road now, and we know where we are. We are about, I'm going to say about 5 miles west of Patterson. And that is the basics of navigating. Just find a spot on the ground, a good reference point to get where you're at, and then follow roads and stuff. Alright, I'm pretty for sure that clearing right there is the airport. Now, I've already tuned the CTAF frequency. Again, we'll go over radio communications later, but Jesus, they're having themselves a right Barney, aren't they? What you're hearing is other airplanes on the radio. They're not all coming into Brunswick. There is one other, but we're picking up the other airports nearby that are on the same CTAF frequency. There ain't but 3 or 4 frequencies used for CTAF in the U.S., so airports nearby all you tend to use the same one. And that was the ding from Plan G telling us we're getting close to our destination. And I already see it. Now, I heard on the radio there is an aircraft that's landing on runway 7 at Brunswick Golden Isles, which is where we're heading and the runway we're using. So, he's over there somewhere. We need to know where he's at. Now, just like in real life, it's really hard to see another airplane when you're airborne. Especially smaller GA planes like this. So in real life, what you quite literally have to do is just look for a dot that's moving. That's how you find an airplane in real life. Even a 747 a mile and a half away is going to look like a dot compared to the openness of the sky. In Flight Simulator, the draw distance on AI airplanes is not very big. So how are we going to see that other aircraft that's landing? Well, I'm going to teach you. I want you to hit the Ctrl Shift L key combination. And what that does... Okay, we just heard him. He was 1 Sierra Mike. There's he is right there, 7 miles from us. So these labels, what this Ctrl Shift L combination does is put labels above the AI traffic. Now you can set what these labels will say. I have it set to show tail number and distance, but you can set it to show whatever you want from various options, things like altitude, airline call sign, yada yada yada.
St. Mary's traffic, Cessna November 277 Papa Tango is 3 miles southwest inbound visual, runway 4.
Now, the labels only show up on airplanes that are within 10 miles of you. So I see we have 2 airplanes that could be a factor. We have the one that's 7 miles off our nose landing at Brunswick. And we have another about 5 miles off our nose heading our direction, but he's lower than us. So I'm going to head straight for the Brunswick inlet over there. And I'll use these labels to keep track of the AI plane. We're going to be following that AI aircraft into the runway. I'm going to announce our position on the radio.
Kilo Bravo Quebec Kilo traffic, Cessna November 176 Charlie Mike is 10 miles west 3,500 inbound to land. Runway 7.
Now I would need to start a descent at this point, but since I can see there's AI traffic right here heading my direction but lower, I'm going to maintain 3,500 until we are on the other side of him. I don't want to descend into him. There's no guarantee he can see me. I wonder what he's doing flying so low like that. He's probably at about 2,000. Yeah, and you see we are crossing paths right now. So if I had started descending, we could have been in conflict. You can see his landing light, but you can't see him. Look how close we are. There he is. He's a Cessna. Yeah, and you saw how bad the draw distance is on AI planes in Flight Sim. Keep an eye on him, see when he disappears. Yep. So half mile on some AI planes. Okay, we're on the other side of him now, so I can start descending. And again, to descend, I'm just going to pull the power out and let the nose drop. And that's all you got to do to descend.
St. Mary's traffic, Cessna November 277 Papa Tango is 1 mile south.
Lovely day out.
Visual, runway 4.
Alright, we've leveled off at 1,000 feet. I'm going to maintain 2,200 RPM. I want the plane to slow down. We're about 2.5 miles behind that AI aircraft up there who's landing on the same runway. I'm going to go ahead and announce we're on final.
Kilo Bravo Quebec Kilo traffic, Cessna November 176 Charlie Mike is on final. Runway 7 to land.
And we're just going to line up with the runway. Now we'll discuss the proper way to fly into airports in like the traffic pattern and all that later, but for now we're just going to discuss basics when it comes to landing. So I'm going to push F7 to lower the first notch of flaps. Alright, he's on a 1 mile final now.
St. Mary's traffic, Cessna November 277.
I'm going to go ahead and slow us down. We won't slow down this early normally, but since there's traffic, I'm going to slow us down to final approach speed now. Alright, second notch of flaps. Now what flaps do is increase the drag and lift. This makes you fly at a slower airspeed without falling out of the sky. Now as we come into this airport and slow down, we need to note we are on what's called the backside of the power curve right now. And what that means is our control inputs are kind of reversed. And that right now our throttle controls altitude and our pitch controls speed. That plane should have landed by now. He should be clearing the runway. But I'm not going to land unless I hear him say he is clear of the runway. Alright, we'll go ahead and load the last notch of flaps. Alright, he's clear of the runway. And the runway is ours. Now, any other planes landing or taking off would be on the lookout for us, because now we're the next in line to land. No airplane will be taking off right now. We are what is termed right now, we are on short final. Meaning the runway is ours. So no one else should be using it when you're on short final. Okay, I'm too high, so I'm going to bring the power out. Again, power for altitude, pitch for airspeed when you're landing in this aircraft. Pitch down the speed up. No wind to worry about today. So as we come over the runway, we get about 20 feet above it. I'm going to level the plane off and I'm going to bring the power out. And I'm going to slowly start pitching back to land on the main wheels first and then let the nose wheels settle onto the ground. That was a bit of a hard landing, but I've had worse. And this is a nice long runway, so we really don't need to use the brakes. We can just let the plane coast. But on longer runways, use of the wheel brakes may also be necessary. There's also aerodynamic braking, but we'll talk more about that later. This is just the bare bone basics. Alright, so now that we've slowed down, I'm going to add some power to keep us taxiing relatively quickly, in case there's any other planes on final. The key thing to remember when flying into untowered airports like this is they don't have to use the radio. It's optional. Some planes could be flying here that don't have a radio, so yeah, it's not required to fly into an untowered airfield. Unless that airfield lies within airspace of some kind. Alright, we're going to clear the runway. Hit F5 to raise the flaps. I'm going to turn the landing and strobe lights off. And we need to announce we're clear of the runway.
Kilo Bravo Quebec Kilo traffic Cessna November 176 Charlie Mike is clear of the runway.
Alright, now we're just going to taxi the parking. Now, at a towered airfield, you would have to call ground and request taxi to parking. But this is non-towered. We don't even have to announce we're taxiing to parking. We can just taxi right on over. Just make sure we're not going to cut in front of anybody. Now I know where the parking is on this airfield. It's over there where the other planes are. And I'm just going to taxi till I'm wing to wing with the Mooney. Right about there. Brakes. Alrighty. Set the parking brake. Now to shut down the airplane, there's a specific flow we need to go. To shut down an airplane completely in Flight Simulator, this is how we do it. Avionics, the white switch here, turn those off. Those need to be turned off first. Lights. All lights should be off except for the beacon light. Fuel mixture, you can either hit Control Shift F1 or you can grab this knob with the mouse and pull it out all the way. I'm going to hit Control Shift F1 and that cuts off the fuel mixture. We're going to wait for the prop to stop. It has. Then we need to turn the magnetos all the way to off. Lights off. Go ahead and flip the beacon light off now. And master battery off. And now the plane is completely shut down. Now you could, if you were wanting to replicate real life procedures, go ahead and set this to left or right, again to prevent cross-feeding. Not necessary in Flight Simulator, especially if you're going to save the default flight, because you want that in both. And we'll just hit Shift E to open our door. And the aircraft is parked at Brunswick Golden Isles Airport. Alright, that was the first video in the series of basic tutorials. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.